Hello everyone, this is Evelyn again. Welcome back to my channel. You can call it Howard's Gallery. My name is Evelyn. Today I want to show you how to make a beaded blur, or call it bikini, but today we are working on the blur alone. And we are going to start with like the simplest type, the mesh one, because I got an order of that type, so I want to show you from that. We are using this gold bead, then the lock. This is the type of lock I'm going to use. It's opened like this. So you can use any type of lock, but to me I find this one nice and neat on the bikini. Like, this is how it looks. This is the waist bead. So what you do, what we need is needle, and we use the smallest type of needle. As you see, this one, some of them are longer, somehow longer than this one. This is the short one, so any you can use works, but the short one is more comfortable when working because you have to pass through the beads. So this is the type of needle we are going to use. When you're buying, buy the smallest needle. They are tiny. It is not this needle we use on hand sewing the clothes. This is smaller. Then we use this type of thread. I'm thinking of buying a black one, but when I was starting on this project I used the white one. Still, it is okay, it can't be seen in the beads. So this is the thread I'm using, and still the thread I'm using the smallest thread. It has size numbers, but I've not yet mastered that. So any shop you go to and tell them you want a small thread, they will give it you. It is only white and black that have a smallest size. Other colors have, I think, have other bigger sizes. So this is a bigger size. This one I always use on waist beads. For people not to complain, I always get those who break the thread, this small one. So I use the big one on waist beads, but on the bikini, for it to be like loose, that shaking of the beads, you have to use this small one. It is the better thread to use. When you use the big one, the bikini is somehow stiff, and that being loose makes it even more nicer. So what you do, you put your thread in the needle. I've already put mine, but it is somehow longer, so it's going to, sometimes it disturbs. So the thread I'm going to use is somehow longer. So what I do, I start with the lock, and how do I lock? You get your thread and pass through this lock. Then what I do next, I use a small size bead, as you see this one. I use a tiny bead that will enter this. I tie it like we make a knot for the thread not to come out of the lock. So you can tie like 3 times. It has to be strong to avoid the complaints of the lock coming out. So after I cut this thread, then I use a lighter, or you can use anything comfortable. I burn this, then I think you can see how the bead gets inside. So after that, I first put back this one, then I get my thread, my needle, and this is how I enter the beads on the needle. It takes some time, but this is the only way you can do it somehow quick than picking one bead. Why do I use a longer thread? I use a longer thread for it to, like, not to have many tied knots, because they don't look nice. So that's why I use a longer thread, for me to have few knots, like not to tie a lot, because after tying I burn, and sometimes after burning the thread turns to black and it doesn't look nice when it is seen. So that's why I opt to using a longer thread. So you keep doing that. So now our line is here. The problem, this is the only background I have that is comfortable for me to work. So I'll show you how I measure this. What I do, I get this here. I hope you will see this very well. So when I'm measuring, I make sure that what I measure starting from the lock, because when you measure and you have not included the lock, meaning you're adding like some extra inch on someone's measurement. So I include the lock. The person I'm working on is 29 inches. So you can see our 29 is missing like 4 to 5 beads. You will excuse me on the movement of the camera, because I'm still an amateur when it comes to filming. So now what I do, I on our measurement. So what I do to tie this other lock, remember we've finished the measurement and it's 29, so you come and pass through this other part of the lock and get your tiny bead and also get it through. Remember we start with the lock and get the bead through. So what I do, I pass through this lock and the first bead immediately after the lock, and you should make sure it is tight because it has to look neat. So after you try and lock, so now this is what we have. So you can see this is our center. So I get this long thread to come through the beads up to this side, like here. So our thread is, remember it has moved from here after locking up to here. And what I forgot to tell you, since we are using a smaller thread, I double it, like after putting it in the needle, I make sure all the two ends meet. That's when I tie. So when you use one, like not doubling, since this is our chest, it is going to be in our chest, anything can happen and the thread is torn. So that's why I double on the start. So now another thing you should have in your mind when you're making this blur is the size of the breasts and the height you want for the blur. Like, will it cover the parts you want to cover? So I always use half a needle. As you see, it is more than a half because I don't always count beads. Yes, it is neat when you count, but it is also something very hard to count these tiny beads. So what I do, I estimate what I want to do, like what I want the blur to look like. That's what I depend on. So after putting this, you can bring this and enter through the beads. Like I've told you, if you can manage the counting, you can count, because you can either count this and make them uniform, and counting this space here. So you do that first curve. Remember, we are working on a mesh. You see? So what I know, when you use it to something, even your estimation with the eyes cannot be wrong. It will still bring out what you need. So you go through the bead here on our first string. So I'm going to do 5 of these. So this is our first bob, our first side. So after making your 6, you can either make 5 or 6, but the more wider you want the blur, then you have to increase on the what, on these curves. So it depends, because we need something that is wider, not the other small blurs you've seen on my Instagram. Those who follow me on Instagram, and those who don't, please, you can check on my Instagram at Howard's Gallery. So what you do, you come, let me show you how it is. So you bring your needle and get through this. Don't know whether this is going. So you see the thread here. So the needle is going to pass through this bead. So you get through the beads and pull your thread. So it has not given us what we need. We want it V like this, so we have to go through more to other beads to get to our V that we want. And we have to be careful, sometimes the thread ties itself in the beads because it's tiny and the beads too are tiny. So it is also something, it is a challenge, but it just needs patience when you're working on this for the thread not to disturb.